The Seattle Storm, there's a rainstorm, a thunderstorm coming for management, the coaching staff, and likely the roster. So we are going to talk about what we know and, quite honestly, what we don't know about the situation in Seattle.
You have three people who are selfless like that, three people who are dangerously disciplined like that, and you have a coach that also embodies all of those characteristics. You can expect good basketball.
I love interacting with the fans. I'm excited for them to cheer for us because it's hell when you come here. I even welcome people that could be skeptical because it's new.
There's going to be a standard of excellence and discipline in everything that we do.
The Pacific Northwest, this area, how passionate they are. It's culture everywhere, but it's great culture here. That's what I want to be a part of, to compete for a championship. That's everybody's goal. And I think it's just how we go about things and habits that we create. I want to be around winners that'll help us get closer to that.
And that's what the fans can expect. And we're going to have some fun.
I mean, even just listening to that reel after all of the news just makes you wonder what exactly is going on in Seattle, and we're going to talk about it. My name is Erica L. Ayala, alongside Joveta Rodriguez. This is Tempestagi Talk. This is the Seattle Storm podcast as part of Black Rosie Media, and this is a bonus episode. We are in our off season, so we're going every other week. Unless there's breaking news or something that we want to talk about. So Black Rosie Media will also have our regularly scheduled weekly podcast. Gotta Get Up, a podcast for New York Liberty fans. That will be on Thursday. So this is not replacing Gotta Get Up. This is an addition to, because there's quite honestly, some troubling reporting that has come out of Seattle camp. Annie Costabile for the Chicago Sun-Times, the first person to report that the coaching staff being investigated after allegations of harassment and bullying. And Annie also reported that the WNBPA, she heard from the WNBPA, and the WNBPA saying they are aware of the investigation. They declined to comment further than that. And Annie also reporting that she received no comment from the WNBA. So, in figuring out what's really going on in Seattle, I want to preface that we really don't know what's really going on. There's pockets of reporting in different areas, and we're going to break down to the best of our ability what we've heard. And I think it's not that to say that the reporting isn't valid, but it is to say that, at least right now, I think it's fair to say, Roberta, that there's a lot of reporting that is pulling things together, and it's not a clear picture. And I want to also say that it might not be a clear picture for however long this investigation takes. It was also reported that the Seattle Storm organization is working with a law firm to investigate these allegations as I outline them. So I want to anchor the conversation there. We've said this on Tempestagi Talk before, but I really want to be clear. I'm not in the business personally of, we do this for entertainment, and there are times when you can have fun with things and you can impart your opinion on things, even your biases on things. This, in my estimation, is not one of those things where we should do that. We can certainly react and respond to things that we've seen, but I am going to be very bullish and diligent in keeping us grounded in what we actually know and not going too far beyond that on this bonus episode. So with that said, for our format, we usually do 4 quarters and a halftime where we talk about things outside of just Tempestagi Talk or the Seattle Storm. Since this is a bonus episode, we're going to do halves like we used to do in women's basketball. So we'll have the first half and the second half with a halftime in between, where we'll take a little bit of a break from this story and we'll talk about some news in women's basketball. So I just wanted to lay the foundation and maybe set some guidelines before we get started. But first and foremost, Roberta, what is going on in your world these days?
What's going on in my world? A lot, as I bet you have seen. It's been some pretty intense days of a lot of hard work to try to figure out what is going on with this investigation. I mean, I think one thing is very important to lay out there. When it comes to an investigation, no one knows what goes in it while it's happening. It's illegal. If something leaks, even the law firm can be in trouble. So in journalism, what we do is go around and see what's happening and try to put the pieces together. So that's what's going on. We have heard from people on Jewel's side. We have heard from people who are not necessarily on coach's side, but have knowledge of the situation and are very involved with in this world. So that's what we have. It's been some very busy days of talking to people, going after sources, talking, writing, putting things together, putting things on my head. So it's been some very busy and intense days, and I'm looking forward to discussing that.
Yeah, so again, let's break it down. The Chicago Sun-Times, the first report here, since we've also seen reporting from Beta Basket, we've seen reporting from Circling Seattle Sports, we've seen reporting from the Seattle Times. But again, most everything, at least initially coming from the report from the Chicago Sun-Times. That article from Annie came out on November 15th, so just earlier this week. And again, the allegations are harassment and bullying by the coaching staff tied to on-court performance during the 2024 season. The allegations stem from incidents that happened at practice and during games. Now, the coaching staff is who is mentioned, so that of course would include Noelle Quinn, but we cannot assume that it is only Noelle Quinn that is part of the investigations or even attached to the allegations at this point.
Yes, definitely. We don't have, there isn't, from that initial report, there's nothing that says Noelle Queen is being investigated. From talking to people and talking to sources, Noelle Queen is supposedly the main subject of everything that's going on. I mean, she's the head coach. That's part
Right.
of accountability, right? When you're the leader of something, you respond for it. And Noelle Queen has always been very firm about that. So Noelle Queen has been in the center of the conversations. We had heard, like at first it was only like lore, I think, on social media of people bringing up situations with Noelle Queen. But now we know officially that there is an investigation going on. Annie Costabile, if I'm not saying her name correctly, I'm sorry, but Annie Costabile broke the news Friday night, and just and it literally broke the news and broke the internet, because I think that and we've talked about that in this podcast. People are not very harsh on the storm. People don't really try to dive into things, and this is probably one of the first times that I've seen something this serious come up from here. We've been talking about it. We've been discussing here and there about what could have gone wrong, and we have touched on court relationships, on some contention between Jewel, Noelle, some lack of confidence on general manager and ownership, and now all of that is coming together into this instance where things have gone things have gone too far and it has come out.
Yeah, and I mean, we've talked about this on Tempestagi Talk. We got started officially just before the Olympics, and then in earnest after the Olympics, following the Seattle Storm, up until their first round exit, where they were eliminated by the Las Vegas Aces. And what was evidently clear at times is that this was a team that was according to Noel Quinn, and also players at times underperforming, not meeting the expectations that and the not meeting the standard that was set, not meeting their full potential and capability. And at times it also sounded like it was perhaps a disconnect between not just the effort, or maybe not even centrally the effort, but perhaps the attitude, the approach, the willingness to show up and know that you can't take any team, any moment for granted in the WNBA. Skylar Diggins-Smith was very vocal about that. And so it's no surprise, I don't think, that there was kind of trouble in paradise. But when we go to some of the tertiary reporting that we've had from Circling Seattle Sports, you also have done some reporting, and we'll get into that in a minute. But the Circling Seattle Sports in particular reported about a players-only meeting, which excluded Nneka Ogwumike. Also talked about Diggins-Smith, Skylar Diggins-Smith, and quotes that she led several outbursts laced with vulgarity during practices directed at teammates. Then, some of her history in the league also came up. So, those are in addition to what was reported by Annie Costabile and the Chicago Sun-Times. So now we're not just talking about the coaching staff, which the investigation per the original report is on allegations of abuse and bullying coming from the coaching staff. But now some of the secondary reporting is making mention of player leadership. So let's just get into what we have seen reported, and if and how that aligns with what we had seen throughout the season.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My wife was calling me. I'm just telling them that I'm not ignoring. I'm just recording a podcast. Yeah. So what I've heard from, I've talked to several people. It does seem there does seem to be some disagreement with Skylar Diggins-Smith way of operating. We saw Circling Seattle Sports talking about vulgarity. All of the sources and all of the people that I've talked to, there has been people have been describing Skylar as like diva, which I'm not sure that's the proper way to address a player, but the center is on Noel Quinn and her leadership. People have been bringing Skylar a lot into it, as in blaming her for the coaches turning against the players. There has been some. This narrative is one that is out there, that Skylar Diggins-Smith is the one who instigated this whole situation, and that she's the one who came in and stirred things up, and some people saw that negatively. Like I said, I talked to people who are close to Jewel Lloyd. I talked to people who are close to coaches. I talked to people who are close to the inner circle of the Seattle Storm. There isn't an agreement that it was Skylar Diggins-Smith who caused that, and I particularly don't see that as a good thing. And I wrote extensively about that Skylar is an easy target, and we have even talked about that in the pod. She is an outspoken Black woman who is just who she is. When we talk about vulgarity, what is vulgarity? What does one person consider vulgarity? I mean, I'm not going to say the word, but there was an instance in which Kia Nurse was mic'd before a game, and Skylar said a word that starts with P that many people would consider that vulgar. I mean, I don't think I'm the best example of what words are good or not, because I
Yeah,
can be
and
like,
I just want to stop there because that is a different, that's not related to this particular topic. I know what you're going for, like what is vulgarity, but I think also, I mean, that was a circumstance where she's talking to a colleague, and she's an adult, she's using language. So I know what you're saying, and I think the reason that you're mentioning it is because there's this perhaps gray area on what vulgarity is. But I guess that's also a part of why I want to start with the facts first, because there's a wide spectrum when it comes to a lot of different things, not just with Skylar Diggins Smith, but with Jewel Lloyd and Nneka Ogwumike, who we're going to get to. So, yeah, so someone just put in the the comments, like, that was a joke Skylar made. And again, I think you might not appreciate the word that she used. It might not be a word that any one person, that people can choose to use that word or not, whether they mean it vulgarly or not. I think that we can all agree that in that instance, it was not to be offensive, and it was something that was said in jest. So I just want to be evidently clear, because again, this is the reporting so far is a little bit dicey when it comes to what, in my opinion, the reporting or the interpretations can be a little bit dicey between what is considered abusive or vulgar and what is how people operate.
yeah, no, yeah, and I asked directly what kinds of things happened. No one was able to describe in terms of words what were the words that were said. Some people said slurs, some people said vulgarity. The one thing that people said is that there was pressure from the coaching staff that some players should not get the ball, and if a player passed the ball to a player that was not supposed to get the ball, that player would be bullied. That's would be bullied or alienated. That's what sources have been saying, in terms of the whole description of what is the bullying and what is the harassment that's happening.
That's really interesting because, for anyone who's played sports before, there is, whether it is expressed or not, at some level, likely you've come across a moment where, whether it's coming from your teammates, if it's coming from the coaches, that's pretty egregious. But that it's just like, hey, that's not who we want to have the ball in this scenario. And I think there is a part of that can go beyond and can be, I don't know if I would use the terms bullying or, harassment. It could be, I suppose. I guess just I can only speak from my experience. And I would say at most, I would probably use the word inappropriate, especially because if you're a coach and you don't want a certain person handling the ball, then the recourse that seems more natural would be just to not play that person.
Yeah, and I think that there is a fine line between, being rough in sports and like getting to being mean. I think there is a fine line, and again, just thinking as a human being, what is offensive, something that may be offensive to me is not going to be offensive to another person, and I can't discredit
Right.
someone who has felt offended by something that someone said.
Right.
So
That's literally the definition
yeah,
of harassment, and those are
exactly.
workforce harassment um, guidelines.
Yeah,
That's
and that's something. Yeah, that's something that has been consistent. I feel like across the board. Any, I feel like I keep saying her name's wrong. Is Annie Costabile?
costable. Yes.
Costable. She wrote that it was performance. It was based on the bullying and the harassment, and was based on performance on the court, and that's similar to what I heard too. That the bullying and the harassment would come depending on how a player did and what a player did on the court. So that has been um, consistent.
Yeah, and again, bullying and harassment. What clarifies and what constitutes that? I think that you can be bullied and harassed at any level, and that is in the eye of the beholder. Effectively, it's what this sounds like to me in an umbrella or a catch-all phrase, which honestly I think probably is well, whatever. I think the catch-all phrase is probably an uncomfortable, an untenable, or even an inappropriate work environment. That being said, and I'm not saying that this is right or wrong. I'm not saying what should be versus what shouldn't be. I think we can agree, though, what is true in sports is that language, and whether it's appropriate or inappropriate, is circumstantial. And sometimes you have to have a conversation with your teammates. Like, I had to have a conversation with my teammates. They were calling me something and saying something to me that they thought was a term of endearment. And I was like, no, I don't identify as that. I'm not going to respond to that. So you need to not say that around me, because that's not how I roll. So sometimes you have to have those conversations. You're dealing with adults. Do I think personally that adults should be censored? To a degree, no. And there's just certain language that
Yeah.
adults are going to say, hey, I don't get down with that. We have to work together. Do you, boo? And when we're together, don't use that language. And you have a choice in that moment. You can either honor and respect a colleague, a teammate in that moment, whether you agree with them or not, or you can ignore that. So again, we don't know what the levels to this are, at least not right now. I'm just offering up a few different scenarios to hopefully anchor again what is happening here. So we've talked though about Skylar and potentially the coaching staff when it comes to performance based, and I want to get back to that a little bit. But I really want to go back to this idea that you have the WNBPA president on your team, and the team calls, per reports, and all players meeting without the WNBPA president, aka a Storm teammate. That seems odd to me on a lot of different levels.
Yeah, and I gotta say that I think that things started getting weird for me when people started pinning NECA at the center of it. Of all of the people that I've talked to, and that's like a lot. It's a good amount of people. NECA's name came up once. No one is really talking about NECA or that she's responsible for anything.
And so this is from your reporting that you're saying? Okay.
I didn't write about it, but I didn't write because I didn't have anything about it. No one said anything about NECA and what her involvement with it was. What we have about NECA is what she has said publicly, and it is that she relates to the coaches, And what one of the reports said is that NECA was not involved in the meetings because the team was afraid, the players were concerned that she would be partial to the coaches. That raised a question for me: was Skylar in those meetings? Was Skylar in those reported meetings? So I haven't heard about NECA and her, what she could have done about it. I do think that the WNBPA being like telling the Chicago Sun that there is an investigation going on, is at least they are owning that there's something happening. And if it's not that investigation, then someone is gonna report on it. But I haven't heard about NECA. I have to be honest here, and I haven't heard much. I've heard one person talk about NECA. That's what I heard.
Yeah, and again, this is, I want to be straightforward and direct, and I also want to say that this is not a indictment on specifically the reporting that you're offering us now on the podcast, because again, we here at Black Rosie Media, we want to try and anchor as much in truth as possible. What I hear you saying is that per your sources, only one person has mentioned NECA. Now, you haven't said in what capacity or how they mention NECA in relation to any of this, and if you choose to offer more there, you can. If not, that's fine. But what I want to say is that the reason, just a little bit of journalism, the reason that more often than not, journalists try to talk to multiple sources is because when someone tells you something, you take them for their word and you are hoping that they are being upfront with you. And the reason that we confirm sources, or at least try to, is because someone can tell you the truth and it not be the full picture, if that makes sense. Because we all only live our perspective. So I just want to put that out there. Yeah.
We can't do a report based on what one person is saying.
Right.
That's not journalism. That is, that's just gossip, basically.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't mind what the person, that what one of the people that I talked to said about NECA. Is very similar to what the narrative was on social, that like this is not a good look on NECA as the president. That's what was said.
Well, I mean, something not being a good look doesn't, that's not, that's an opinion. I also really, I'll just be honest, as a human being, I hate that this isn't a good look. I honestly don't even know what that usually means, because that seems to be an opinion. I mean, there are things that happen in people's lives that they might not appreciate being associated with it, but her job is literally to be involved in these kinds of conversations in her role with the PA. And just because she's the president of the PA, or anyone, Stewie could be in a similar situation. And it's like, is it not a good look that there's drama on her team? I mean, humans are complicated, messy people.
I'm so glad you're saying that.
Complicated, messy people with feelings. And sometimes you don't always get along and you don't always align. And I think it's also interesting, and we're eventually going to get to this, but this is an investigation. I find it also interesting. I don't know what it means yet, but I find it interesting that there's an investigation and that moves haven't been made to remove people already. I think that there's a few reasons you would do that as an organization, as the Seattle Storm, and at least part of that is to make sure that there is no liability, however this ends, that falls on on your shoulders, which I think is also really interesting. So again, I know I'm kind of giving hypotheticals, but my point, and I said this at the beginning of the podcast, is that right now, at least, we just don't know. We don't have all of the facts, and we have differing opinions. Hey, Damien, thanks for joining us on Tempestagi Talk. I'm not going to recap everything. We did talk about this at the top of the show, and I'm going to copy again the Chicago Sun-Times article. I'm going to put this, it's in the chat, higher up in the chat. We're going to recap things at the end, but in the interest of that this is a shorter episode, because it's a bonus episode, we're going to keep moving. We are going to move into the second half, and that will be questions and comments, and we're going to do that in just a little bit. So if you still have questions, Damien, after checking out this article or any of the other things, then put that in the chat and we'll get to it. I mean, I think there's a lot of people sharing differing opinions, including, Skylar Diggins Smith, and whether or not she is, drama follows her. I think several things can be true. And I think in the circumstance and situation with Skylar, I'm just going to put this out there. I really don't want to get into my opinion on Skylar. First of all, I think I've kind of said that before, and I don't think, again, in really trying to anchor this in truth, it's necessary. What I will say is that if we're attaching drama to Skylar, let's also just remember where Skylar played. She played for Dallas, and she played for Phoenix under Vanessa Nygaard. So
I broke that down. Like I put that in front of people's face. Like, look what's happening in Dallas and look what happened in Phoenix. And I do want to respond to what Chris commented of offering this info at days after the fact is weird. Not every info is going to be reported, because as a journalist, I can't report on something that only one person has said. That's what we were just talking now about, checking with multiple sources. That's why this is important. So not every information is news. Not every information is something that we can't put out there. So
it can't be corroborated.
Yeah, exactly. So and not every information that's gonna be corroborated and that's out there is good, is gonna be positive to someone. So Erica, I love that you said, you mentioned something about layers, and I think this is something that's very important to take into consideration here, that that this is like, people are not black and white, people are not just good or bad. And people were talking about Skylar having drama follow her. You have to look into the whole picture, and you have to look into what's happening around that person. You have to look, it's layers, like a good person can perform bullying if they are not completely, they can do that. A good person can do something bad, and that bad person can do something good. And sometimes what's really bad for you is neutral for me. What's really good for you is neutral for me. And I think that when things go out into the world and it goes like into social media, people want to put everything in a box. And wanting to put Skylar in the drama box is, I don't see that as a good thing. I think that I don't want to go with what I think here, but just considering what we know about women, especially women who are outspoken, that's not a good thing. I can also say, and I said that in my last report, that there is a side that's really trying to push a narrative of, Jewel was wronged. And it seems like they are trying to put Noelle as the person in the wrong who is being influenced by Skylar. So there, like I said, there are layers, and investigation is not something that just any person is going to have access to. And it can be an investigation, like the firm was hired by the Storm. It's an internal investigation. The same was done by the Aces. the Aces had an internal investigation against Becky Hammon. So this is going to go a while. This is going to take some time. People cannot expect to have answers right now. I cannot think that I have the answers. What we have are pieces that are going to be tied together to paint a picture. But coming out to conclusions and trying to set things in stone, it makes things difficult. I think I can't separate myself from the fact that we are talking about people and we're talking about human beings. That's something that I always took into consideration in my report since 2008 when I started covering women's basketball. I've always looked out from the outside to within, like what's happening around the player to understand what's happening with the player. And that's the approach that I'm taking with this. And I think that this paints a better picture on not pointing fingers, because we also have to take into consideration that players are public figures. Players and coaches are public figures. They are stars. Let's not forget that Skylar Diggins-Smith was the first player to be signed, the first women's basketball player to be signed with Rock Nation. She was on stages. She's a very public person. So I think it's very important to take all of that into consideration and just to think about the fact that those are human beings who have layers. They're not characters. We're not talking about a villain. We're not talking about a hero. We're talking about real people.
I really like that. We're not, we're talking about people, and you mentioned it earlier, but I think the hero villain thing, especially when things are sometimes tried in the court of social media, things get a little bit wonky. I honestly don't think that we have any real indication of what happened. I think it is fair to say that we have potentially multiple parties that are dissatisfied and unhappy with how things went down. And again, we've talked about it on this podcast, and it's been recorded, literally recorded, like there are Zoom recordings, and it's been reported that not just Noelle Quinn and not just Skylar Diggins-Smith have said that there is an effort issue, or there was an effort issue at times with the Seattle Storm. We're going to take just a quick little break here. I did intend for us to do a halftime. I don't really know that that's appropriate for our bonus episode because we have so many comments in the stream, and I do want to get to questions and comments. We have some that I've seen here, and if you have other things that you want us to address, we're going to go for another 15 minutes or so. But right now, I just want to play a clip. Christina Williams has a weekly podcast as part of iHeart Women's Sports. You should definitely check it out. But right before all of this news broke, she had Nneka Ogwumike. Nneka has been she's been on a media circuit. A lot of that, I think, is to do with the collective bargaining agreement and outside of that. But Christina asked Nneka a little bit about, what she's kind of looking for at this time in her career. So I want to play that. And then we can continue the conversation because we haven't spoken too much about Jewell Loyd. We talked about that on our last episode, but I think it's worth coming back to Jewell Loyd. This was an off year for her. Whether you look at her statistics, the Olympics was very strange. We talked about that. And it would appear that perhaps people, I don't know if I want to say speaking on behalf of Jewell, but that are definitely close to Jewell Loyd, you would assume are close to Jewell Loyd, have kind of been sounding off. So I, again, want to anchor this in truth, but I mean, that's a fact as well, that we have parties outside of the immediate team that are weighing in, maybe a little cryptic, but, just worth mentioning. So here's Nneka with Christina Williams. This is from, in case you missed it, with Christina Williams.
You're unrestricted free agent again. What will determine you re-signing with the Storm or looking for another opportunity elsewhere?
I mean, right now, what's important to me is definitely ownership engagement, coaching staff, practice facility, and being competitive with teammates that provide a good locker room. I'm entering year 14, so I don't really have time for the BS. I'm like trying to go in there, have fun, play game, play, win, compete, but do it also in a way where I feel supported both physically and mentally, So those are all the things. I mean, Seattle has all those things, so.
I mean, she talked about specifically locker room and teammates, and then ends though saying that Seattle has all of those things. So, I mean, this is happening. This is happening after the season. This is an interview after the season, before the official reports of the investigation. At the time of Annie's report, I do want to say also that the Chicago Sun-Times reported that at the time of their report, the investigation was already 2 weeks in. So I don't know the exact overlap, but just putting that out there. But so, I mean, what do you make from that clip from NECA? What did you make of it when you first heard it? And has your mind changed since the reporting about the investigation?
Not really. And the thing that I wanted to say is that NECA has been very consistent on her messaging regarding where she's going next. She was also, I think we talked about that in our last episode, that NECA talked on A Touch More, the Sue Bird and Megan Rapinoe podcast. She said exactly that. I want coaching staff that I trust. I want an ownership group that is engaging. I want practice facility. And she was talking to Megan because Sue couldn't be there because she's now part owner also. So she has been hinting at that. And I think that players want to come back. The one thing that has been also very consistent about NECA is that her relationship with Noelle Quinn and the coaching staff has been key to her experience at the Storm. And she has been talking a lot about how important it is for her to see herself in the coaching staff. She has talked a lot about how important it is to have a coach who listens to her, and she and I'll never forget the whole gangster thing. I don't know if you saw the clip when she said that Noe was a gangster, and Percy Allen asked Noelle Quinn, so your starting power forward said they were a gangster. Do you agree with that? And then she said, sure am. So that you can see that there's a connection there. You can see that there is this connection. And from watching Noelle Quinn, I mean, I've watched every single Seattle Storm game the past 4 years. When you look at Noelle Quinn, when she took over the Seattle Storm, and Noelle Quinn this year, it's a completely different person. I mean, publicly, she, the way that she talks, the way that she expresses herself. I'll never forget when she said, when you're wearing the Seattle Storm jersey is a privilege on itself. There's nothing I can do for players in terms of will that has to come from within. She was very outspoken and very direct and very confrontational, the way that I see it. She was much more less confrontational, I would say. But I feel like this year,
because I don't think you made the connection as clear. I think I understand what you're saying, but I just want to be evidently clear. How did Noelle Quinn change in the 4 years? Yeah.
Yes. Of course, it's now her 3rd year as a head coach in the WNBA, so naturally she has more confidence. But you see that the message resonates with at least a few players, and we see that it resonates at least with Neck and Skylar. So and I say that to go back to what Neka is saying, that like the Storm already has what I need. The Storm has the coaching staff that I can relate to. The Storm has the practice facility. So the way I see it, she's pointing out what she is willing to negotiate, what is a non-negotiable for her, and she knows what is already there in Seattle and what needs to improve. So I think at the end of the day, it's going to be a Storm decision. What do we want? What kind of team do we want to have? Do we want to keep legacy, which would be keeping Jewel Lloyd, or do we want to shake things up?
Right. And I think that's fair. And I do want to take the conversation there, but I don't think I understand what you perceive to be the difference in Noelle Quinn in that time. Is it just the confidence, or
the confidence? Yeah, the confidence.
Confrontational. I mean, I don't.
Yeah.
I
mean, so I mean,
Noelle Quinn is confrontational. That's not the word. I mean, I think I'm confront. I know.
Yeah, I think you're a New Yorker. Confrontation comes naturally. So
Noelle Quinn, though, I don't know if I would describe her as confrontational. She might be, but I don't know.
And that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Like, what she did this year was the most confrontational that I have seen her in the past year. For her to say, I can't create the will to play, they have to create, like, I can't make the players want to play. That is, for her, that is very direct.
That's not, it's direct, but I don't think that's confrontational. Like, I think she's being honest. I don't.
Yeah, exactly. But again, the cultural thing of Seattle, I think that also goes into play.
Maybe I need to look up the definition of confrontational again, because I think this is a point that you make when you talk about Skylar. We have to be thoughtful when we post certain labels on people, because the term confrontational is not necessarily seen as something that is a quote unquote positive. It's not a characteristic that people, generally speaking, like being associated to leadership. I think sometimes you absolutely have to be a confrontational leader. But I think, and I don't want to stay on this too long, because I really don't want to offer too much of my opinion, because there's so much that we don't know.
Yeah.
I just think that perhaps that's where the rub is, because if a coach is saying you can't teach effort, you can't teach hustle, you can't teach wanting to play for a championship, wanting to play to what we heard from Noelle Quinn is that this organization needs to get back to its legacy, to its championship legacy. To me, that's not confrontational. That's challenging.
Yeah. So that's for confrontational.
I don't know.
So if I had to use a synonym for what I'm saying for confrontation, is direct.
Okay.
Straightforward. That's what I mean by confrontational.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So
that's what I mean.
Yeah.
And that might be like a language barrier thing, but that's what I mean, like direct and straightforward, like not necessarily like underlining tones and all that. So
yeah, direct. The most direct Noelle Quinn has been, I can get with that.
Yeah, that's.
I don't know. But yes, I think she was direct. I think that she definitely was challenging the team. And I mean, the team, we talked about this. Was this a failure of a season? I mean, comparative to last year, no. Comparative to on paper how this team should have performed, maybe. And now we have all of this mess to deal with, which includes reports that perhaps the not confrontational, but the confrontation, perhaps part of the confrontation, if one does exist, which it seems that one might exist between Jewel Lloyd and the coaching staff is that Jewel Lloyd did not meet her benchmarks. And she talked about that in exit interviews. We played that on our last episode. But the financial implications of that, there has been reporting that perhaps there are some that feel that Jewel Lloyd not reaching her benchmarks had to do directly with coaching. That's really interesting to me because, you know, I think Jewel Lloyd's shooting percentage was down this year. Like her accuracy, her efficiency wasn't where it needed to be. Now her minutes at the Olympics, if the Olympics was a benchmark and she didn't get any playing time, and now that has a financial repercussion, I think that is a more plausible conversation to me. But to associate benchmarks and perhaps the coaching staff being responsible for her missing those benchmarks, that seems like a little bit of a more of a stretch to tag on to Seattle as compared to what happened at the Olympics, which I think is also worth a conversation. But I guess, I just want to make that clear. I think saying that Jewel Lloyd didn't hit benchmarks because of coaching, it could be a part of the recipe, but I think also Jewel Lloyd had an off season. Now that is all to say that if you do not feel supported, if you do not feel understood at your workplace, there could very well be a time where your performance will reflect that. So again, we are getting little breadcrumbs and nuggets. But what I think, even before we knew that there was an investigation happening, again, our last conversation about Jewel Lloyd was, what is the future here? Because it didn't seem like there was a clear path for the Seattle Storm and Jewel Lloyd, even without the investigation. And now adding that on top of it, is there a path at all? Or is this going to have to be a separation regardless of what the investigation shows?
Yeah. So again, what I hear, and that's from basically every single person that I've talked to, is that someone is gonna have to go. This is the kind of thing that a team is not gonna. The team is not gonna work that way anymore. There are so many relationships that have been strained. There are so many trust, like so much has been, like so much trust having has been broken, that something has to change. Someone's gonna have to go, and that's where we don't know where the storm is landing. That is something that no one has any idea. We don't know what ownership wants to do. We don't know what GM wants to do. We do know that the associate general manager is part of the coaching staff. That's one thing that we know, and that's Pokey Chapman. But that is something that no one knows. There hasn't a single thing being said of what is the direction here. And there isn't even like any room for, like, no one knows. That's where, like, we don't know where it's going to go.
Yeah. Again, there's just this is just a mess. Like, there is somebody, multiple people, I think, are likely going to have to take accountability in this situation. And I think that there is a world in which there are players which are going to have to take accountability. I think also, and I've seen it in the chat a few times, there are some players where the writing is kind of on the wall. Sammy Whitcomb is an interesting one, and someone that we're going to talk about soon in our off-season series, wants to explore free agency. Mercedes Russell, we didn't get to speak to in media exit interviews, so we're not really sure where Mercedes is. And we kind of broke down, again, social media can be an interesting place, but we broke down what was shown and seen on social media, but also, again, how much can you really read into someone responding to a conversation about, I don't know, like, now at the time, that's what we said. In hindsight, now after the investigation, it's an interesting nugget. I don't know that it offers enough context right now to say, oh, that's definitely, the smoking gun. I don't think it offers enough, but it's definitely illuminating. But I think we need to reserve any final judgment. I just don't think we have enough information. I think also there is a world in which we can say that multiple people were discontent and dissatisfied with how the Seattle Storm season went, whether we're talking from the coaching staff, whether we're talking the players, definitely, and perhaps front office. Sometimes that happens. This is a team that I think there was not perhaps as much pressure, we've talked about this, as maybe a New York team, but there was some expectation internally. Now, whether that was fair or not, realistic or not, we can have a conversation, and we have had those conversations. But being dissatisfied with how something went, not exactly the same as things being abusive, and things being abusive and investigated, doesn't always mean that there are going to be, I almost said appropriate, but that seems a little bit more of an opinion than a fact. Like, I want to know where this investigation lands, because for me, I'm having a difficult time understanding how the organization is going to move forward, and not make some significant changes. And I saw a question here earlier, is this a Seattle Storm team that has promise? I think if we were talking in last offseason, we would say absolutely. Or during free agency, we would say absolutely. But now you have a situation where someone who played alongside historic Seattle Storm players, at minimum, is dissatisfied with how this season went, at maximum, wants out completely, and is, really kind of carrying the banner when it comes to an investigation into bullying. That's kind of a huge hole. So there's no Sue Bird on the court, at least. There's no Brianna Stewart. And it's looking more and more likely that there is no Jewel Lloyd, no Mercedes Russell, Sammy Whitcomb probably leaving in free agency. Where she falls on the spectrum of discontent, I'm not really sure. I think Jewel and Mercedes it's a little bit easier to gauge that they were discontent, dissatisfied. So now you have a player like Nneka Ogwumike, who's only signing a 1-year contract. Skylar Diggins-Smith, who, regardless of if you want to label drama attached, hitch it on her wagon or not, I think what we also know is Skylar Diggins-Smith, like Nneka, is not really about the drama. So Nneka can still leave. Whether Jewel stays or not, whether Skylar stays or not, whether the coaching staff, Noel Quinn, stays or not, Nneka could still choose to leave Seattle. So what the future is for Seattle, a lot rides on how this investigation goes down.
Yes, exactly. And we see here in the comments, and I've seen on social media, on comments, on my own reporting, Storm fans are very loyal to Jewel. There's a lot of loyalty. Jewel is someone who is loyal. She values loyalty. That's Jewel is very loyal. So it's hard to say something that's not without speculating, and I don't really want to do that. But yeah, like Sammy's comment right now. But I think the question that I have is what is going to be the direction that someone mentioned front office, and that's exactly what I was gonna say. What's the direction that the front office wants to go? Are they gonna be, let's keep jewel, let's keep loyalty, let's keep fans, or let's focus on and I want to, and like, it's crazy because the word confrontational comes to my head, I think, because that's maybe I had the wrong concept of the confrontational, because Jewel is, we talked about that, more reserved. She wants to play, and then you have Skylar, who is not, and Noelle, who was a little more direct this season. So what is the direction that the front office is going to go? And that's a question that none of us can answer. That's a question that we can try to paint a picture, we can try to put pieces together, but we don't have the answer. And the comment that Frank Grace made about how the front office always held their cards close to their chest, that's also something that I've heard from people. And I want to be very mindful on not talk from what I know and talking by what people have, from what I have investigated. But everything like matches. So someone also said the writing was on the wall and Stewie's departure was a sign of that. Yes, Stewie's department was a big red flag. And we have been sounding the alarm. We have been talking about how, eventually things are going to get to a point where, you keep like pouring on the cup, it's going to overflow. And I feel like it got to that point. And because it involves a player who is so dear to, it involves a player who is very dear to the fan bases. It involves the coach, and it involves a player whose fans had a lot of opinion about. So this is, and it really depends on how the Storm is going to deal in terms of transparency regarding the next steps and the investigation. It's an internal investigation, so I don't think that they have to release any findings. That is something that I don't think that they have to. So it's really going to depend on what is their priority, and we might only know what their priorities are by their actions.
Yeah, agreed. And as you were talking, I think the biggest, I don't know if it's a question, I don't know if it's a tell, but we have to remember that Sue Bird is a part of this ownership group now. And I think that I want to be clear. I don't think it's appropriate to quote unquote save someone's legacy in service of coming to a conclusion that is better for a legacy versus versus serving the people who were wronged in a situation. So basically, that's my way of saying my hope is that the Seattle Storm move forward in earnest, given whatever findings that come about.
Yeah,
I don't know what
the same feeling.
I don't know what those findings are going to be. I think that there is a wide range from everything that has been reported and kind of picking up breadcrumbs. I feel like there's a wide range of ways that this can go. And I'm not of the opinion that there is one completely right party and one completely wrong party at the moment. This just seems extremely messy to me.
Yeah.
The reason I mentioned Sue Bird is because I think that, and maybe you can look to how Atlanta handled things. I don't necessarily, well, let's keep Atlanta out of this. Interesting to see. For me, I think I'm curious to see how Sue Bird, once we get the final findings, once we get more information if and when that information is ever shared. I'm curious to see how Sue Bird maneuvers, and whether she sticks with the organization, whether there's a separation that she makes from the organization, and or if she is more public facing in how the organization moves forward. So when we talk about the history of the Seattle Storm franchise, yes, it's predicated on how this investigation goes. And there's a part of me that wonders how the organization, or if the organization, is able to utilize an owner like Sue Bird to forge a new path forward. Whatever the promise of the Seattle Storm was at the beginning of the 2024 season, I don't think we can assume that that is the same trajectory that they have at this very moment.
Yeah. And I think that one thing that is important to keep in mind is that we have the majority owners of the Storm, and we have the minority owners. And if I'm not mistaken, Sue Bird falls into the minority part. So, and honestly, we don't know what's in that controlling contract. We don't know what Forced and Hoops, what are the decisions that fall under Forced and Hoops, and what's the decision that fall under the minority owners. That's when you have Sue Bird. Again, I don't.
Force 10 is the big ownership group, and then Seattle, or Sue Bird, is one of the
minority, because they rose capital for the practice facility.
They opened up ownership shares. Okay, got you.
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to make sure.
So I think that people also are going to need to be very careful from jumping into conclusions on how they're going to involve people's names on things. Again, that's the kind of thing that we have no information on, and we can either go by what we know from a person or their history, their demeanor, but we don't have the facts. Like, I don't know how much Sue is going to be able to weigh on this. I don't know if she knew about it.
That's true too. I mean, I know I said I was going to talk about Atlanta, but if you talk about a different organization in a different league, in the NWSL, Sarah Spain was an owner that came in as part of I really don't like using the word minority, so that's why I'm struggling. But for the purposes of equity, I will use it, but I do not use that word in other contexts, just to be clear. So if you see me struggling, that's why. So Sarah Spain was a minority owner of the Chicago Red Stars, and the Red Stars had a massive reckoning, and Sarah Spain was being publicly asked to respond. Why didn't she do more? Yeah. And eventually she was able to kind of share what she did know, what she didn't know, how she navigated through it. And eventually Sarah Spain was a part of the ownership that was completely bought out. So the Red Stars opted to clean house completely. I don't know if that's what we're going to see from the Storm. I guess it depends on how deeply rooted this goes, because what I think we have seen, even just from our live chat, and I mean, the comments have not all been aligned, which is fine, because I think there's, again, a lot to take in here. And there are parties that I think are rightfully feeling kind of put out and feeling wronged. Where that all ends, I don't think we know. But I just I just really don't see how the Seattle Storm front office can salvage this situation without having some real difficult and like, they have to have some truthful, uncomfortable conversations. And what I would like to see, I don't know if this is what we're going to see, but I will impart my opinion here. However this goes down, I really would like to see the front office take ownership over how they're going to move forward, and to have action steps on how they're going to move forward. Because even if the allegations don't if they're unfounded in whatever investigation is going to happen, do you want to have a situation where in the court of public opinion, people are kind of dogging your program? I think there are people who, there was an investigation of the Vegas Aces. They had an internal investigation. There was a league investigation. And here's the thing, just because you are found cleared of wrongdoing doesn't mean that that perception of wrongdoing vanishes, for better or worse. There are times where sometimes the perception does vanish and maybe it shouldn't. There are times where the perception doesn't vanish and it should. I don't know where Seattle's going to come out on the other end. So I think the best recourse is to own whatever the findings are and to take accountability, because one person, and it doesn't seem like it's just one person, but one person feeling that they are being harassed and bullied in an organization is one too many.
Yep.
My opinion.
Especially when we're talking about the women's sports, a women's sports team. Like, I do think that it's gonna demand directness. And I've said this in this podcast before. The Seattle culture bleeds a lot into the sports industry here. And I'm talking about all of the areas. When it comes to a women's sports team, the expectation is a well-behaved, no drama thing. If like, and that's where I go with the confrontation word, because in Seattle, being direct, being straightforward, people are going to see you as confrontational and as creating drama and being dramatic. That's Seattle culture. That's how people operate here. So, but when we're talking about basketball, when we're talking about the WNBA, I think that what happened is that we had a 20-year tenure of a player who was the face of the franchise, and who people saw the franchise as Sue Bird.
Mm-hmm.
Sue Bird retired. The women's basketball landscape is very different from 20 years ago.
Yep.
Are getting into the WNBA different from how a rookie Sue Bird entered the WNBA in 2002. Everything is very different. Basketball is much more globalized. Basketball has more culture from everywhere, from the South, from the North, from the East, from the West. The team Seattle, and I'm not even talking about basketball, just like in general, there has to be a culture shift, because the USA is more global. The women's sports landscape is more global. We see the NWSL, no more draft. Why? Because they're going to lose to international leagues, because soccer is more global and basketball is becoming more global. Gabby Williams has already said, I prefer to stay in Europe because I make more money. So where is everyone going? It's a situation that at the end of the day, it's so much bigger than just what's going on with the Seattle Storm. I'm not going to go there because we're going to hone it into the Storm situation. But it's something that needs to be thought from WNBA leadership, like from the top to bottom. So that's where my head goes with all that. There is this issue at this instant that has blown up and has to be taken care of very seriously, because the culture of Seattle bleeds into the team and there's no directness. It's easier to, let's just do what makes everyone happy, or let's pretend that it's all that everyone is okay with it. I think that that's where the issue is. It's the understanding that the reality and the landscape of women's sports has changed.
And so again, for me, and I don't think this is a stretch, the biggest flaw of this Seattle Storm organization, at least right now, regardless of the investigation results, is communication. And we were talking about this, if the for those who are a part of our Slack community, we really broke this down, because there are people that are close to Jewel Lloyd who are communicating things. Noel Quinn is communicating things. Skylar Diggins Smith is communicating things. Neko Ogwumike, Sammy Whitcomb, Gabby Williams are communicating things, and the message is murky. The message is unclear. There are through lines. There are through lines for sure, but somewhere the message, the goal, the vision seems to be lost. And that's not a good place to be when you are a team that has talent and has potential. But you're not going to get there in today's WNBA, to your point. Raw talent alone is not enough. You must have good leadership. And the way the way that we're seeing good leadership defined, yes, it's in
New York
facilities. Well, sure, that's not where I was going, but sure, it's in the not even the facade, the real resources like facilities, like what the locker room looks like. All of those things are a part of good leadership, but they will not fix bad and poor communication.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when you think,
and Dallas could maybe be an example. Dallas,
yeah.
I never figured Dallas out. Phoenix is communicating a lot publicly, and I just don't see that they're kind of punching up in weight class based on what they're saying and where I think they are right now. That's my opinion of Phoenix. New York, I think you can look at New York, you can look at Vegas to a certain extent, although they might be on the, they were riding the roller coaster and, they already hit the apex and now maybe are having to re-up so that they can, reach high heights again. That was a terrible attempt at an extended metaphor. I'm tired. What can I say? But my point is that, and this is, I've talked about this, I wrote about this for CBS Sports. For me, the coaching changes that we saw were a part of either an attempt to find better leadership, or quite honestly, at least in equal parts in some organizations, an overcorrecting from the front office for fear that they will be found out for their deficiencies, at least right now, in leadership in order to be successful in the WNBA. And the cream will always rise. The cream will always rise to the top.
Mm-hmm.
We have so many vacancies, even the Sparks. This was going to be in our halftime, but we're not going to do that for today's episode. We're just going to focus on this. The Seattle Sparks, the LA Sparks.
Could be a good name though.
Yeah, LA Sparks just hired a new coach. I think that, again, today's WNBA is not yesterday's WNBA. The expectations are so much higher, and results mean different things. The timeline to maximize results is different in today's WNBA. I don't know that the formula is perfect. I do think I see some inherent flaws in how I see some of the trends happening for the WNBA. But even putting all of that to the side, the Seattle Storm will not survive whatever genesis is coming in the WNBA if they don't figure out how to handle this situation. They will not survive because they will not keep the talent that they work so hard in free agency to get. They will not have star power that will have or want to stay with them. And that's critically important. They won't have young stars that have veterans to learn under if they don't figure this out.
Yeah. And I think it's good to look back to last year, where the team ended and where the team ended today, and how far the team could have gone today. When we talk about legacy, there's a huge problem in like living in the past and legacy. So, do we want to continue winning, or do you want to live in the past? And I have experienced that with my soccer team back home in Brazil. We just fell to the second division because glory's past, you know. So what do they want to do? I saw someone asked here, how did that all happen on the course of one season? This kind of thing doesn't happen in the course of one season. It's like
Yes.
it boiled, you know. It
Yeah.
got there is this expression in Portuguese that it is água mole em pedra dura, tanto bate até que fura, which is like the water that is soft drips on the rock, it drips and drips up until it cracks. So it's like small things that drop here, small things that you know drip there. The situation became out of control
Yeah.
because now you have this situation. This kind of thing is not a one season thing, and that is not unique to the storm. Look at organizations. There were recent situations with Uber. There were situations with Apple. Every company, every organization that had a big situation come out, it didn't happen on the course of 1 year. It's like like history is so important.
Yeah.
It's so important. So like eh, people need to look past like the the now. People need to look into the whole picture, you know. Unfortunately, you cannot do that in 280 characters. You cannot do that in a 60-second TikTok video. It requires a lot of critical thinking.
Yes.
It requires a lot of investigation. It requires thousands of characters, you know, written in Microsoft Word. Uh, it's very dangerous to fall into defend conclusion. You know, fall like go for only one narrative. It's
Yeah.
this situation specifically, the lack of transparency leads leads to lots of narratives. You know, the lack of transparency. We can't like all we can do is investigate and report on our findings, but we don't know exactly like of everything. No one knows what direction the front office is going to go. No one knows. We don't know if Jewel is going to go. We don't know if Noe is going to go. We don't know if Skylar is going to go. Like, you can't, it's a dicey situation. They are not in a good spot right now. They're going to have to look, they're going to have to do like, and to look, take a very good look in the mirror and
No.
be what is going on, what's happening, and be direct. They're going to have to confront themselves. There's no one else that they have to confront except for themselves to find the best solution.
Agreed. Well, we're going to end this conversation here for now, for today. This is not the end of the conversation because there's a lot that we do not know. There's an ongoing investigation and pending results of that investigation, whether those are reported or not, I guess we'll find out. And, you know, again, I just don't see this being a move one player and everything is fixed.
No.
This, you know, I see a lot of people in the comments, and I think it does stand to reason, just because Lloyd just doesn't seem to. It seems like she's maybe maximized her time with the Seattle Storm, but particularly with Noelle Quinn. So whether Jewel stays, whether Noe stays, whether neither stay, like you said, Joeta, more work has to be done. The foundation has to be evaluated, and hopefully that's what's a part of the investigation as well. We thank y'all for joining us again.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
We, you know, tried to keep this to what we know as the facts and to offer questions as opposed to give concrete answers. I don't have concrete answers. I personally, I don't think anyone does at this
Nope.
time. So we'll have to see what happens. Tempestagi Talk will be back in our usual format next week, but we will also have our conversation on the New York Liberty on Thursday. So Brian Florentin will join me. He is our co-host of Gotta Get Up, a podcast for New York Liberty fans. The New York Liberty ain't got all this drama. They're still celebrating in the Bahamas, although unfortunately it seems like John Cole set some people straight who are coming after her fiance. So unfortunately, that might be something that we talk about in context of the ongoing celebration of the 2024 WNBA champs. But Joveta, thank you for your reporting. Thank you for clarifying. Thank you also for being open to, critique of certain language, especially when it comes to Black women. I think it is extremely important to make sure that we're digging a little deeper than just some of the tropes, quite honestly, that are associated with Black women. So I appreciate you being open to that and helping me understand where you are coming from on that. And I guess to be continued.
Definitely to be continued. It is like, it's ongoing. And the truth is that, none of us is going to know anything until the storm says something. Yeah. And I appreciate the understanding because, I've been living in this country for a long time, but I still have a lot to learn in terms of like language. Although I'm very proud of where I am in terms of English speaking, there are things that I'm going to, I'll be honest, that's the first time that I hear that definition of confrontation. So I appreciate the feedback because it's all about learning. And
I know that you are leaning into, as you should, your culture and being from outside of the United States. But quite honestly, you just look at the political climate. We in the United States don't always agree on definitions. That's why I'll be like, listen, if I don't know something or if I'm misinterpreting something, I'm happy to know it. But I always try to, and this is what I do when I talk to quote unquote trolls on social media. I'm like, okay,
exactly.
Define what this means to you, just so I know. And I think that's important because if someone's not willing to do that, then that's not a conversation in earnest. That's trying to own someone. I'm not interested in that. But I'm always down for a conversation. And again, I believed that I understood what you were saying, but I wanted to make sure. And there's nothing wrong in asking for clarification.
And I appreciate that because I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I was like, ooh, comfort. I was like, listen, girl, I know I'm confrontational. I own that. I own it. I go in seeking to be confrontational at times. And if someone calls me confrontational out of context, that's a problem because that's what Black women are seen as. And so I was like, okay, let's just make sure we understand. Anyway, we're going to close it there. We actually went a little longer than we had anticipated. Yeah. This is a meaty conversation. I can't imagine this will be the only bonus episode that we do. But again, thank you for joining us tonight. And if you want to be a part of our Slack community, you can find the link. It's on our YouTube page. We'll also put it on Blue Sky. Not really using Twitter that much these days, but the link is on the Black Rosie Media Twitter if you want to join the Slack community where we have had these conversations. We will continue these conversations in between our recordings. But all right, Joveta, thank you so much for your time. Thank you all
of course.
For comments. And we will catch you on the next episode. Until then, peace out, everybody. Have a great night. And hey, we'll see if the Seattle Mariners will land. I think, what did I see? Is Stanton having meetings with the Seattle Mariners? Very interesting. Anyway, maybe there's good news ahead for Seattle fans, but we shall see. Thank you, and have a great night.